Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to talk some of the biggest winners and losers from the preseason heading into the regular season. Of course, Jared already did a full article on this topic. You can read that for free at DraftSharks.com. We'll be talking about a lot of the guys that he included, not all of them though, and there will be more details. And also check out the full rundown of preseason takeaways. Jared collected those at the end of every week of the preseason, talked about important usage notes, performance analysis of key players along the way, and they're all stacked up. You can look back through the 3 weeks of preseason games. For now, though, Jared, let's focus on the entirety and talk about biggest winners and losers, maybe guys who moved in our rankings as a result. Kenny Pickett is up first on the winner's side. Tell me why he's a preseason winner.
Yeah, Kenny Pickett. I mean, he looked awesome. The Steelers' offense, passing in particular, looked really good this preseason. Pickett's numbers, 87% completion rate, 13.3 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. I mean, it's small sample. All this preseason stuff is small sample, so we don't want to react too strongly, but it's also worth reacting to in a lot of cases, and I think it is worth reacting to with how well Kenny Pickett played. Pro Football Focus had him as their best passer in terms of passing grades this preseason. And it's also worth remembering that Pickett was first in PFF passing grades over the final 5 weeks of last season. So this strong play, at least based on PFF grades, is kind of a continuation of what we saw at the end of last season.
There's room to overreact as well as underreact. We don't want to say, all right, Kenny Pickett's awesome, I'm drafting him as the 10th quarterback right now. But we also don't want to say it's preseason, it's not that many passes, ignore. The question is, when do you take Kenny Pickett, what this means for us, whether we're actually looking at him at all, really, in a 10 to 12 team fantasy league. And Jared, I want to not only ask that, but I saw you tweet yesterday still that Diontae Johnson and George Pickens are overvalued in drafts. So what's the context here? Should I pay attention to this Pittsburgh pass offense for my fantasy team?
Well, that's what's keeping me from ranking Pickett too highly, is because I do still think the Steelers want to be a run-heavy offense. Everything they've said and everything that we've heard, out of Steelers camp all offseason is that they want to be run-heavy. Now, volume is less important for quarterbacks than wide receivers, right? Like Pickett can have a good fantasy season even if the Steelers are run-heavy, in large part too because Pickett can run. I think that's an underrated aspect of his profile. He's not going to be a Josh Allen level runner, but he can be Russell Wilson in his prime level runner where he's, giving us 20 to 30 rushing yards a game. I'm in on Pickett as a quarterback too. I think, if you get into a 12-team league or more, 14, 16-team league, and you're looking for a quarterback too to platoon with, another later on option, I do think Pickett is in play. I'm still for the most part out on Diontae Johnson and George Pickens at ADP.
Yeah, I think Pickett's fine to take as a QB2, and he's going to look like a butler the entire time with those gloves on. So you got to like the dignity of that. I'm a little bit more on board with Diontae Johnson because I think if we do think that his quarterbacks are going to be good this year, that he's a low risk bet to make in wide receiver 3 range. And if things really do click, even just from an efficiency standpoint, he has a really good chance of delivering on that draft position. George Pickens, I'm a little bit less in on because I don't think that he's going to really challenge Diontae Johnson for that lead in target share. So even if he's efficient and scores for us and has some big weeks, I think he's going to be inconsistent, kind of like a Gabe Davis level of performer, and we'll see exactly what he can deliver. The next guy on our winners list is Houston running back Dameon Pierce. What went right for him?
Yeah, so Dameon Pierce in his preseason debut opened by playing the first 14 snaps of the game, 14 in a row. No one else came in to sub for him. And then in the preseason finale, CJ Stroud in the first team offense played 9 snaps. Pierce was on the field for all 9 of those snaps. We also saw him run 10 pass routes in the preseason. He was even split out wide for 3 of his snaps. So, again, we don't want to read too much into this. Pierce obviously not going to be at 100% snap rate player or anything close to it during the regular season, but it definitely looks like he's going to claim a bigger share of that Texans backfield than, we thought a few weeks ago.
You're going to see in some places, this guy was a winner because he didn't play at all. This guy was a winner because he played 14 straight snaps in the first game. It's important to look at the entire context. And obviously that's what Jared did in that preseason takeaways article that I referenced. For me, I'm surprised at just how much it was Dameon Pierce with the first team offense here. It was not like Najee Harris and Jalen Warren from that Pittsburgh offense we were just talking about. I would have expected more Devin Singletary to be involved. So I agree that because we did not see more Devin Singletary, Dameon Pierce looks like more a part of the passing game than what I was anticipating.
For sure. I have noticed his ADP climbing, Dameon Pierce. Like I'm seeing him go in the 4th round. We like the volume. He's still a running back in what's probably going to be a bad offense. So I don't think there's a massive ceiling here. So if he's going to be going in the 4th round, I'm mostly out on him still. Devin Singletary, the drafts I've done in the past week or two is like barely getting picked. Like no one wants to touch this guy anymore. And I get it. Like he's not going to have standalone fantasy value, but at minimum, you still have a clear cut handcuff in Devin Singletary. So, if you can get him in round 14 or 15, I definitely think he's still worth considering there.
All running backs are more likely to suffer some kind of ding during the season that has a chance to make them miss time than they are to not and make it through all 17 games. So I agree. And I agree that if Pierce gets into round 4, not interested. He's still not somebody I'm excited about for the factors that you were just talking about, but round 5 on, certainly fine with Dameon Pierce there. And there is upside. Another running back from a different team, Tank Bigsby, Jared. What makes him a preseason winner? Somebody that I've been on board with all along, and I'll actually change the name tiles here because I forgot through Dameon Pierce.
Yeah, Bigsby had a nice ascension throughout the preseason. I think in the first preseason game, he didn't get many. I think it was maybe 1 snap with the first team offense, but in the preseason finale, Bigsby played 36% of the first team snaps. Travis Etienne played the other 64%. So that's basically a 2-to-1 split in favor of Etienne in terms of snaps. That's kind of, I think, what we should be expecting in week 1. And then we'll kind of see how the backfield evolves from there. Bigsby also looked good this preseason, which I do think matters more for rookies and younger players than veterans. Like I don't really care how proven veterans look in the preseason, but when you see a rookie like Bigsby get on an NFL field, average 5.7 yards per carry, that's encouraging. So I definitely think Bigsby, should be climbing your rankings after the preseason.
Was some talk after that third game because he fumbled near the goal line. We'll see if that matters. Some coaches, that means you don't touch the ball for the next 2 weeks. Other coaches are like, that happens, and toss him back in. So we'll watch the usage. But Tank Bigsby has not been a guy that we were planning to start in week 1 in lineup setting leagues anyway. So I agree, positive preseason, and we'll see what the usage looked like. It's worth noting that last year in the first Doug Peterson season, the Jaguars started out the year with James Robinson as the clear lead ball carrier, Travis Etienne, the clear receiving leader in the backfield. I'll be curious to see if that's kind of the breakdown that he prefers with different guys this year, and we get more Tank Bigsby in that role. Not projecting it. I'm waiting to see exactly what happens like with that.
I will say in that last preseason game, like Bigsby and Etienne both played in all situations. So like you said, Bigsby got the goal line carry on the first drive. Etienne got a goal line carry on the second drive. Both guys played in passing situations. So it wasn't like these guys are in specific roles. It was like, we're just going to rotate them through. So again, that might just be they want to see both guys in those roles, or that might be what they're planning in the regular season. There's no way to know for sure.
Yeah. And both guys should be 3 down types where they can play in all of those roles. That's what they look like. Elsewhere on that Jacksonville offense, Calvin Ridley came out of the preseason as a winner.
Yeah. I think we were concerned about just what Ridley was, coming off the long layoff, and everything we heard in training camp was positive. The preseason, I guess, was kind of just like final confirmation that, Calvin Ridley is back, I think, to something at least close to what he was in his, prime season when he went for 1,400 plus yards. Ridley this preseason caught all 5 of his targets from Trevor Lawrence for 71 yards, ran a pass route on every single Trevor Lawrence dropback, and saw a 31% target share. Now, again, it's tiny samples. Like the target share doesn't matter too much to me, but the fact that he was on the field for all the pass plays looked good. I no longer have, concerns about, what Ridley has left in the tank.
Yeah, and combine that with all the reports basically since the start of camp where anybody watching the team is like, Calvin Ridley is awesome, and they also still have Christian Kirk and Zay Jones. So, I was wondering heading in, what is Calvin Ridley, like you're saying, at this point after last year off and, far removed from the last time he played football, but it looks like he's all the way back. It looks like they want him to be the lead wide receiver in Jacksonville. It certainly looks like he's the most talented one, which we would have guessed if there weren't any other issues that needed answering. So the downside here is that everybody has moved Calvin Ridley up. You're likely to see him go at least in round 3. You'll see him go in round 2 at times. So there hasn't been a point this year where I'm really strongly on board with drafting Calvin Ridley, because by the time I got comfy, everybody else was comfy too.
I like Ridley in round 3 at this point. I'm still taking T. Higgins over Ridley. That's kind of like my cutoff point. But once T. Higgins is off the board, if I'm even early round 3 and Ridley's sitting there, I'm definitely open to taking him.
Yes, I agree that he is fine in round 3. Dalton Kincaid from the Buffalo Bills, Jared, what makes him a winner? And I think it's a little bit different than the next tight end winner on this list. Yeah,
I think you could go a couple ways with Kincaid. Like some people might be discouraged by what we saw in the preseason. I was encouraged by it. So Kincaid ran a route on 68% of Josh Allen's dropbacks in the final 2 preseason games. That's like lower than we want. We're usually looking for 75 plus from a tight end we're using in our fantasy lineups as a tight end 1. But 68% for a rookie, like it's only going to grow from there, I would assume, right? So I still think Kincaid is probably not someone we want to trust right out of the gate. But like, we'll keep a close eye on the usage. And again, I expect his playing time and role in the passing game to grow. So I think by October, he could be someone that we're considering in fantasy lineups.
And this is, again, where specific context matters. If you're a first-round rookie tight end running 68% of routes on the Texans, then I'll see you next year. But if you're doing that with the Bills, then I'm interested, because we're talking about one of the league's most pass-happy offenses. We're talking about one of the league's most efficient scoring offenses. And we're talking about an offense that still looks unsettled at the slot receiver position. So there's enough room for Kincaid to stay at that level of usage and still give us useful fantasy numbers throughout the season, especially at a position where we don't necessarily care as much about target volume as we do at wide receiver.
Yeah, Kincaid was lining up all over the formation too for the Bills in the preseason. It was 45%, traditional inline tight end. 43% of his snaps came in the slot. He was out wide for 10% of his snaps. Was even in the backfield for 3% of his snaps. So they're moving him all over the place. He's basically going to be, their quote unquote number 3 slot receiver. I think
the last tight end on our list before we get to the losers is Luke Musgrave in Green Bay. And I'm just glad that the season's starting so that Jared can stop telling me how awesome Luke Musgrave is, really.
Yeah. To me, the biggest winner of the preseason, just based on the usage, like Luke Musgrave truly got elite tight end usage this preseason, 24% target share, which is, like Kelsey, Mark Andrews level. 89% route rate with the first team offense for Luke Musgrave. To put that in perspective, here is where the top 5 tight ends of last year finished in route rate for the season. Travis Kelce, 83%. TJ Hawkinson, 84%. That was in his 9 Vikings games. George Kittle, 89%. Mark Andrews, 94%. Evan Ingram, 80%. And again, Luke Musgrave was at 89% in the preseason. So, if he stays at 89% of the routes or even in that, vicinity, it would be hard for him, I think, not to finish as a top 12 fantasy tight end this season.
Yeah, and that's where market price matters, because if we did see Luke Musgrave going at the same level as Dalton Kincaid, where he's tight end 12, tight end 11, it might be like, all right, well, let's see here. It's still a rookie tight end. We've got a first-time starter at quarterback. We've got an offense that leaned toward the run, even with Aaron Rodgers. So, we'll see. But Luke Musgrave is still, even though he climbed in ADP, he's like tight end 17, 18 level.
Yeah.
Low risk. Like, it's, if you don't get an elite tight end, you can completely wait until tight end 15, 16. You can pair up Luke Musgrave and like Hayden Hurst, and then just keep the guy that works for you early in the season, or keep them both all season if you've got a deep enough roster.
Yeah, Hurst is a good one. I think Tyler Higbee would be a good pair with Musgrave, because I still wouldn't want to start Luke Musgrave week 1. I'd want, someone like a Higbee or even a Hurst. So I just, a veteran proven, you kind of know what their role is going to be in the offense, Higbee especially. But yeah, again, by week 2, if we see this type of usage from Musgrave in week 1, like Musgrave is probably going to be, at least somewhere near the top 12 in our tight end rankings.
You can check our week 1 rankings now to see just how high Luke Musgrave does sit if you're in a deeper league, or if you waited on tight end. See if maybe he even makes sense for you in this first week when we see what happens. If you have any winners that you think that we left off our list, let us know in the comments. And also, if you like what we're doing on here, what you're listening to, if you're listening to the audio version of this, let us know by subscribing, rating, reviewing our content, really wherever you like to consume it. Even if it's just a general Draft Sharks review on Google, we appreciate all of that. Helps us keep doing what we're doing, helps other people find us. Now, Jared, let's get meaner and go to the losers side. And the first one has nothing to do with performance and everything to do with a surprise IR designation on this Thursday ahead of the season. Jeff Wilson Jr. of the Dolphins lands on IR to start the season. It means he's going to miss at least 4 games with what Mike McDaniel called a midsection injury and finger issues, which is an odd injury report. But Mike McDaniel also added he wouldn't be surprised if Jeff Wilson is able to return this year. I was like, wait a second. Not only is it a surprise landing on IR, but we're not certain that he's going to return this year. A day ago, I was glowing about how much Jeff Wilson Jr. I have in my best ball portfolio. And now I'm like, what if he doesn't play this year? So he's clearly a loser. What does it mean for the whole backfield?
Yeah, I think 14th or 15th round, Jeff Wilson probably isn't gonna make or break teams, but it definitely sucked because he did look like one of the better values. It's a weird one. We had heard he hadn't been practicing at times. He didn't play in any of the preseason games, but the extent of the injury definitely came out of nowhere. So Wilson, by the way, I think is undraftable now. If you have drafts that remain remaining weekend. He could be a pickup, once he's activated from the IR. But Raheem Mostert is going to be a solid fantasy starter, I think, for the first month of the season. Devin Achane, their third-round rookie, did not play a single snap this preseason with the first team and then hurt his shoulder in the second preseason game. He just got back on the practice field, but he's still wearing a red non-contact jersey, so I'm not even sure he's going to play week 1. So then it's Salvon Ahmed and another rookie, Chris Brooks, behind Raheem Mostert on the depth chart. So the other thing here is this could be a landing spot, I think, for Leonard Fournette or Kareem Hunt. That's kind of, I think, the last thing we need to figure out here. But as things stand now, and I think at least for week 1, like Raheem Mostert, someone you can put in fantasy lineups as an RB2.
And there have been reports out of Dolphins camp about how Raheem Mostert is healthier than he was last year and looking more explosive than he did at any point last year. So frankly, even if they signed Kareem Hunt or Leonard Fournette, I think that Raheem Mostert's probably the better player right now. He's somebody that if he's on the board in round 10, pretty close to an auto pick for me, unless I already have like 5 running backs, and somebody that I wish this news had come out yesterday because I could have just drafted him in my FFPC main event.
Yeah, especially in lineup setting leagues, Mostert is the perfect player to take with someone like Breece Hall or Alvin Kamara, who, Kamara suspended the first 3 games. Jonathan Taylor. Yeah, exactly. Someone who, you need that early season production because Raheem Mostert's 31 years old. He has a long injury history. I'm not sure how long he's going to be out there and someone we can use in fantasy lineups. But again, at least for the first month, assuming he holds up, I think he's definitely going to be useful.
Yes, and they start with the Chargers, who perennially are not great in run defense. So I'm excited for Raheem Mostert in week 1 now. I'm just hoping that I can draft a little bit more of them between now and then. Next loser on this list is CJ Stroud, the Houston Texans quarterback. So we like Dameon Pierce. We don't like what we saw from CJ Stroud this summer, right?
He just didn't look good. The first team offense for the Texans, the passing game did not look good. Stroud finished with a 55% completion rate, 4.5 yards per attempt. Again, only 20 passes. I thought the Texans offensive line looked like an issue. Stroud was pressured on 35% of his dropbacks. So that's a bad formula. The Texans, by the way, open against the Ravens. So that is not a good spot for that offense. Draft the Ravens defense if you can as your, week 1 starter.
Yeah, which is what the draft war room has been telling you for those asking me why the Ravens are so high in the team defense rankings. And this isn't a huge deal for CJ Stroud. It does not alter my long-term view on him. We're not expecting him to be an awesome fantasy quarterback this year. The fact that they're letting him start right away, certainly a good sign. Jared, is it changing your feelings at all about Nico Collins heading into week 1?
Maybe a little, but like you're never drafting Collins as a, week 1 starter. He's going in wide receiver 4 or wide receiver 5 range. I will still take him there in both best ball and lineup setting leagues, stash him on my bench in lineup setting, and just, hope Stroud kind of, gets it going as we get later into the season.
Yeah, Texans have always been a more of a we'll see what happens kind of draft pick for me as opposed to somebody to count on. Next up, Rashaad Penny, who I know is somebody that you liked a lot earlier heading into training camp. What went wrong for him since then?
Yeah, he just played too much in the preseason and played, so DeAndre Swift and Kenneth Gainwell both got one of the first 2 preseason games off. Rashaad Penny played in both. And in the second preseason game, Penny played behind both Gainwell and Boston Scott. Now, Penny made the final roster. They kept 4 running backs. They kept Swift, Gainwell, Penny, and Scott. Trey Sermon got cut. So I'm still buying some Rashaad Penny just for the talent and the situation, but he is definitely not someone that we're going to be able to use in week 1 fantasy lineups.
Worth mentioning that Gainwell's been on the team for a couple of years, so they know what he can do. They traded a draft pick for DeAndre Swift. So clearly they thought at least, a pretty good amount about him. They liked him clearly if they were willing to give a draft pick. They paid Rashaad Penny a little bit more than $1 million on a 1-year deal. So they don't need to pay more than market price to get Penny, and that doesn't necessarily show where guys stand next to each other on the depth chart, but it's at least worth noting that that's the starting point. Now, Penny has always been talented. It's a potentially good situation for rushing. We saw that with Miles Sanders last year. I don't think that we should expect anybody to get as much groundwork as Miles Sanders did last year, and probably nobody to get even close to as much as he did. I think what people are chasing in there, whether it's subconscious or on purpose, they're chasing the guy who is Miles Sanders this year. I don't think this group is going to have a Miles Sanders this year. I don't think anybody that's left behind is as good a runner right now as Miles Sanders was last year.
See, I think Rashaad Penny's a better runner than Miles Sanders. I'm with you that no one is going to have Miles Sanders' season. I do think in spurts, even in, in single weeks. Like, if Swift or Gainwell miss time, and if Penny finds himself in a spot where he's going to get 12 to 15 carries, he can definitely have big games. So he's a bench stash. Again, he's nowhere near a starting lineup probably the first few weeks of the season. But I do think if you're looking for an upside handcuff type, I still think Penny qualifies as a nice option.
I agree. Nothing wrong with stashing Penny at this point. Kenneth Gainwell's still the cheapest in most drafts, so he's the one I'm most interested in. Has more receiving upside and had a good sized role in the playoffs at the end of last year. The final loser on this list is one that still hurts me. It's Greg Dulcich. And, I guess we can't see what happens in practice. So I don't know if he has failed to impress coaches or if it's just like, this is how we want to use you. And you're not you're not the guy that we want on the field for every down, Jared. I guess for people who are less familiar with the situation, what makes Greg Dulcich a preseason loser?
Yeah. So in Denver's first preseason game, Dulcich played fewer snaps and, more importantly, ran fewer pass routes than Adam Troutman. So that was tough to see. Now, in the second preseason game, it got a lot better for Greg Dulcich. He ran a pass route on 6 of 8 Russell Wilson dropbacks. So, that's 75%. That if he can stay there all season, he'll be just fine. My takeaway, just how he was used in the 2 preseason games, he might just be a guy that's kind of game plan dependent. Like, Sean Payton's going to look at the matchup. Is this a game we want to deploy Dulcich, or is there more game we want, Troutman out there, probably is a better blocker. So, and that could be tough for lineup setting leagues, kind of, figuring out when to start Greg Dulcich. I still think he's going to bring some weekly upside, and his ADP has plummeted. Like, he's, close to tight end 20 in ADP in a lot of places now. So I'm definitely still buying him if I can get him in that range.
He still certainly makes sense for a best ball lineup. I worry that, not only we got that first signal that his playing time might struggle, but that even if he is just the up and down type, that might be worse, because then he'll have a game that makes you think you want to start him the next week. And then his usage plummets that next week. I think I might rather have him just not get used enough so I can just know that I don't need to start him. As it is, I got my early best ball shares. I probably am just kind of waiting to see what happens at this point. But, as like a tight end 2, stashing on a deeper roster, certainly nothing wrong, because there's plenty of upside to the player. And then we'll see if the situation is a positive or a negative.
The last thing with Dulcich too, I mean, Tim Patrick out for the season. Jerry Jeudy's already dealing with a hamstring injury. We don't know if he's going to be ready for week 1. So, like, what looked like a deep wide receiver core is pretty thin at that point. So that can only help Dulcich get on the field and run those pass routes like we want him to.
Yes. We have updated all of our rankings for all of these happenings and the news. We will continue updating them as needed. And if you want to know exactly who has moved up or down our rankings at the end of each week, Jared posts a weekly article to explain just that. Jared, when should people look for this week's edition?
Either late Friday night or first thing Saturday morning.
So there you go. When you get your coffee Saturday morning, click draftsharks.com, check the movers article, because there's the full list of everybody who moved up and down and why. And of course, those up-to-date rankings power your Draft Sharks War Room. That will take your league settings and customize round by round draft advice to fit your specific format. If you haven't done so already, fire up your Draft War Room now by clicking the button on your screen or clicking the link in the show notes below. Thanks very much for watching and listening. Now let's go win the season. All right.